last week in my newsletter, The Mindset Monday, I included a quick note about one of the companies that I've put on the back burner for quite a while. And it's one that I'm ready to put more energy behind. It's one that I haven't felt quite ready to be the person that I know I would have to be in order to make that company successful. So I mentioned that I feel ready now, and I want to talk about that a little bit today about why. By the way, if you're not subscribed to the Mindset Monday newsletter, make sure you get yourself signed up. I will put a link in the show notes. That's where I send out notifications that I have new podcasts and new things going on. So make sure you're on that list. So the company that I was referring to is called the Institute for Human Progress and Development. And the purpose of this company is to offer people who help other people to offer them the tools, the support, the guidance, and the frameworks that they need to be successful. In other words, this is a company that's intended to help people whose income relies on somebody else's success. And I remember talking to my therapist about this about a year ago. And I remember telling him that when I think about pursuing this career as an author, speaker, and coaching curriculum developer, that I don't know if I have what it takes. And when he asked me to elaborate on that, what I meant was when I look at other people in this industry that are doing the things that I want to be doing, I look at them and I just see such narcissism. And I just don't have that. And since I'm not a narcissist, and I can't seem to convince myself to try to become a narcissist, that I don't know if I have what it takes to make it in this industry. And I get pretty down about that. And he looks at me and he says something that took me by surprise. He says, "You're not going to like what I'm about to tell you, but you are a narcissist." Now you can imagine my surprise. And he was right. I didn't like it. And then he went on to clarify. He said there are two types of narcissist. There's the grandiose narcissist, like, I grew up with a grandiose narcissist. It's the kind that we all know and recognize when we see it. It's the kind that lives in the White House right now. We all know the type. And then there are the wounded narcissist. And he says, you're the second type. You're a wounded or injured narcissist. So in this podcast today, I want to talk about these two ends of the narcissistic spectrum and what lies in the middle, this third way that I think just by having an awareness of this third way opens up a new opportunity at life for us. And I want to help you see that by understanding these three distinct places on this spectrum, we can step more fully into the role that we were meant to play in life. Stepping into that role that doesn't ask us to be anything other than who we really are. It doesn't require us to become the thing that we have no tolerance for or respect for, but it does ask us to step up and be who we really are. So today's episode is going to be especially helpful to you if you are somebody who suffers from low self-esteem or a lack of self-confidence. So if you relate to that idea, stick with me because I'm going to share with you what I have learned about this and how it is helping me find a better footing on the ground that I want to be walking on. To get started, though, I have to give a disclaimer that what I'm talking about today is narcissistic traits, not narcissism as a diagnosed personality disorder. That disorder is found in less than 1% of the population and requires a clinical diagnosis, which I cannot provide. What I am talking about are the narcissistic traits that every single one of us has on this spectrum. We just vary in the amount that we have, or how rigid or pervasive or how harmful the amount is that we have. So I just want us to remember that as human beings, we all have a little bit of everything. We all share this human experience, but how much and what parts and how expressed that is and how prevalent that is, that's going to vary a great deal from one person to the next. And narcissism is part of that human experience. So, all right, now that we got that out of the way, let's start off. I want to dispel the three common misconceptions about narcissism. And I think this is going to help us place narcissism in the correct frame through which we're going to be talking about today. So the first misconception is that narcissists love themselves too much. What we know about people who exhibit narcissistic traits is that they don't actually love themselves at all. Their behavior, that behavior that we just do not like, it's a defense mechanism against feelings of shame or inadequacy that they're carrying around. Which means that these traits are not personality flaws that a person is born with. They didn't come out of the womb being that way. These are personality traits that are an adaptation to that person's environment. So they adapted to what they grew up with. That's what we're seeing in these narcissistic traits. So, a person who grows up not feeling safe or seen or valued, these narcissistic traits become a survival strategy to protect them from the otherwise rejection, shame, or invisibility that they might feel in that environment. Everybody, all of us, wants to be seen and accepted and understood. And when the most important people in our lives don't see us or value us just the way we are, and we pick up on that, we're going to put on a mask that protects us from that rejection. It's an intolerable feeling. It's a rejection that just cannot stay with us. And so we're going to put on a mask that says something like, "Oh, I don't care what you think of me. I'm amazing and I don't need your approval. Look at me. Look at how great I am." Or another mask that says, "You're right and I am unworthy and that's all I'm going to believe." These are two ends of that spectrum. But underneath it, there's actually just a lot of hurt and insecurity. And the degree to which that mask is either opaque or translucent, it's a reflection of how much protection we needed when we were in those environments. Now, there's another theory, it's called the false self theory, and it takes us a little bit further and it says that over time that the person who puts that mask on will forget that it's a mask and they will forget that there is anything beneath that mask. And so they become completely identified with the mask that they put on to protect themselves. And this is going to be important for some of the things that we talk about coming up. But it's like that mask is all that there is. They forget that there's anything behind that mask or ever was anything behind that mask. So this first misconception that narcissists love themselves too much, that is not true. They don't love themselves at all. The second misconception that we're going to talk about is that narcissists don't suffer. Now, we know that they can hurt other people. Way too many of us have been on the other end of a narcissist behavior, but it's easy for us to think that because they're doing the hurting, that they don't hurt or that they don't feel any remorse for that. But that's also not true. People with narcissistic traits still feel. I think what gets confusing here is that we think that we're talking about psychopathy or sociopathy. Those are different things where there is just an absence of any sort of empathy. People with narcissistic traits, they can look like they don't feel, but more often than not, they're actually feeling too much and don't know what to do with those feelings. So instead of feeling all those emotions, they're going to try to control the situation or control other people as a way of redirecting the pain. In other words, I don't want to feel what exists right here, right now. And in order to not feel what's going on right here, right now, the way that my feelings are emerging as the result of my environment or what people are here or what they're saying, to avoid feeling those things, I'm going to control what is here. I'm going to do things that other people are going to find distasteful, and I'm going to control this situation so that I can avoid the emergence of these feelings. I've seen this one up close, particularly the grandiose narcissist who comes into the room and they are loud and they are obnoxious and they take up all the oxygen in the room. And then they try to control other people. Either they dominate the conversation or they make outlandish statements or they're overly loud or making over the top statements that just aren't true. They'll make things up in order to sensationalize the environment or the situation, all the way to infantilizing the other people around them, making the other people around them feel small so that they can feel like the adult in the room. And as this environment that they're in stirs up their emotions, they start to take over that situation in order to interrupt what's getting them stirred up. Now, on the surface, because most of us find this behavior very, very distasteful, we just think, what an asshole. How does this person not realize how much everybody here hates them? The truth is, they probably do realize that. They do feel the regret and the hurt and the sense of injustice or unfairness, but in the moment, it's this sort of involuntary response behavior because what they feel the most is the pain of their own insecurity, and they just don't know how to cope with that. And when you slow down and think about this one, it makes a lot of sense, or it does to me. So when do we as everyday people, we're not inside of a clinical setting where we're supposed to see this every day, but where do we as just regular everyday folks see narcissistic behaviors show up at its worst? I would suspect it's with our families. I would bet that we encounter this behavior a lot more in our homes and amongst our families than we do out in the wild, which again makes sense. When would a person feel the greatest need to put on that mask and behave that way? Or when would a person feel the greatest need to peacock and show off that mask in that way? Probably when they're in a situation and around the people that contributed to the development of that mask or contributed to that maladaptive behavior in the first place. And by the way, this is not me excusing it. I want to make that very, very clear. I am not excusing narcissistic behavior. I just want us to understand it. And more importantly, because of what I'm going to get you to by the end of this podcast, I want you to see the two ends of this spectrum. And especially if you're somebody that experiences low confidence or low self esteem, which is on the other side of what we've been talking about for the last couple of minutes, it's important to understand what's on the other end of the spectrum. It's not me excusing it away. It's distasteful. It's gross. I get that. But when we stand back from it, I think it makes room for a little bit more understanding of this wide spectrum of narcissistic behavior. All right, so the third misconception. The third misconception is that you and we are not narcissists. That is not true. We are narcissists to some degree. To understand narcissism the way that we're talking about it today, we have to see it as a behavior that operates on a spectrum. And we all occupy a place on that spectrum. We all have a view of ourselves, right? We all have a view of who we are and an idea of who we are and what we want other people to see. So we all, to a degree, we all wear a mask that we show off for other people. It's the mask that we put on when we walk into a room and we want you to see this part of us. And it allows us to show off what we want to highlight and hide the things that we're not ready to share. We all do this, and that mask represents this narcissistic trait. We all have it. We all have a little bit of everything, even narcissism. We just vary in the degree. All right, so those are the three misconceptions that I think are important for us to understand in order to move on now to understanding, okay, what is narcissism and how, if I'm on the low end of this, how do I move up the scale? How do I live in the middle? How do I have a healthy sense of self? All right, so what is narcissism? The idea comes from ancient Greece. And the myth goes that this young man named Narcissus, he was the son of a river god. He was extremely handsome. He was so handsome that people from near and far were just overtaken by his beauty. Everybody thought he was beautiful. But unfortunately, he didn't have a personality to match. He was very cold, very arrogant, very aloof. And as you can imagine, with that kind of personality, he had a hard time finding love because in his mind, nobody was worthy of him. He was so much better than everybody else, so much more beautiful than everyone else. No one was worthy of him and his beauty. So one day, this girl named Echo, she falls in love with Narcissist, but Echo had a problem. She was cursed. She could only repeat the last words spoken to her, like an echo. But nonetheless, she was smitten with Narcissus, and she starts following him around everywhere, hoping that he's going to notice her. Well, finally, one day, she works up the courage to approach him, and because of this curse, she wasn't much of a conversationalist, and Narcissus was an asshole, and he made fun of her. And Echo was devastated. And the gods saw how Narcissus treated Echo, and they weren't very happy about it. And so they decided that they were going to punish him. One day, Narcissus comes across a pool of water, and as he bent down to drink, he caught his own reflection in the water. And for the first time in his life, he finds love. He finds love in his own reflection. He was so mesmerized that he couldn't leave. And so he sat there, staring at himself, unable to eat or sleep, just mesmerized by himself. Eventually, he wastes away and dies there. And so this is where this idea of narcissism comes from, this myth of self-obsession. Not just how we look, though, and this is important. It's not just about our looks, but it's about ourself. It's an obsession with the self or the ego, an inability to see past ourself. Now, as I mentioned earlier, my therapist told me that I was a narcissist, and then he explained that there are two types of narcissism. The grandiose, which we all get, we all understand what that is. It's been made popular in pop culture. But the other end of the spectrum is The wounded or injured narcissist. I've also heard it called a vulnerable narcissist. And this is the lesser known but important part that we need to understand today. The wounded narcissist can show up as withdrawn, pulling away from everybody, hiding themselves away. They can be resentful. They can be passive aggressive. They, just like grandiose narcissists, they don't handle feedback or criticism very well. Not because they think that they're better than anybody or superior or above the feedback or the judgment, but because they already think so low of themselves and find themselves so unworthy. So feedback doesn't feel like support to them. It feels like you're throwing salt in a wound that they didn't even know they had. The wounded narcissist has extremely low self-esteem. And so criticism or feedback isn't accepted at the level of the behavior. This is important. It's not accepted at the level of the behavior, but it's internalized as an attack on them. In other words, they don't hear it when you say, what you did was not good. All they heard when you said that was, you are not good. It's an obsession with the self. They can't see beyond the self. Even though it's detrimental, they can't see past self. And so the criticism isn't an attack, isn't a criticism, isn't feedback on the work or the work product or the behavior or the thing that happened. It's an attack on the self. And so their thought process wouldn't be, this was a mistake and I can learn from it. Their thought process becomes, well, I am the mistake. And this is the common feature between both ends of the narcissistic spectrum, the obsession with the self. Both are obsessed with the self. And what both types share is this collapse between identity and behavior. There's an inability to separate the self from anything else. Now, a grandiose narcissist has forgotten that mask that they're wearing isn't real, that it's not who they actually are. It's almost like that mask has become welded onto their identity. That mask is all that there is. But a wounded narcissist has an idea that it's just a mask. They understand that it's a form of defense, that it's a form of survival. There is a level of self-awareness. And that self-awareness makes it possible to move up on the spectrum. So what I'm asking you to do today is, if you're someone that experiences low self-esteem or a lack of confidence, is to take a minute and think about, when I get feedback, whether that's from my spouse or my job, how do I accept feedback? Do I get defensive? Would other people say that when they give me feedback, I get defensive? If so, is it possible that there's this wounded narcissistic part of me that has a hard time distinguishing between who I am and what I do, that has a hard time distinguishing between me and my behavior? Is that possible? That's the invitation for today, is to make that consideration, because if that is possible, then it's possible to move up on that spectrum, or to move into the middle of the spectrum. So move to what? Move to the middle of what? What we're moving to is the middle part of the narcissistic spectrum that represents the healthy sense of self. And this is a healthy sense of narcissism. I mentioned it earlier. When you have a healthy sense of self-worth, you're able to distinguish who you are from what you do. You can stand up for yourself without putting other people down. You're able to say, I'm a good person who sometimes gets it wrong. And when you say that, you don't experience the shame or the denial or the self-loathing that might come with this if you were on the far end of the narcissistic spectrum. And the best definition that I could find about this, and the one that has resonated with me the most as I do this work for myself, is that a healthy sense of self is a person who feels good about themselves and can help other people feel good about themselves. I thought that was a brilliant way of expressing that. How do we get there, though? If we're somebody who relates to the idea of the wounded narcissist, how can we move up the scale? For me, it's been a journey of recognizing where I already demonstrate a healthy sense of self. So instead of thinking that I have a terrible sense of self and I am all wounded narcissist, I want to look for evidence that I've already demonstrated a healthy sense of self, and that's there for me. I find it when I do podcasts like this. I find it when I do blog posts or I do my coaching certification or when I'm supporting my coaching groups. Those are moments when I have a sense of I am good. I am doing something good. I am being good. I am coming from integrity. And I'm also helping lift other people up. I'm lifting them up and helping them see potential and possibilities in themselves. And so this is a place where I'm able to look at myself as human and experience myself as human and offer myself that grace and understand that there are parts of me that is already experiencing this healthy sense of self. So I think for me, that has been the first part. It's just recognizing those areas where it exists. And then I think the other part of this, at least for me, has been to reevaluate those people that I've written off as narcissist. I had to do this when I thought about the people in my industry. I mentioned those when I opened the podcast of how this was brought to my attention was thinking, oh, when I look at that person, they love themselves so much. They're such a narcissist. It's been very helpful for me to step back and reevaluate that person and what I was thinking about them and say, all right, is that person loving themselves? Yes. Is that uncomfortable for me? A little bit, but it's just that I'm not used to it. It's not bad. It just is. But they're also lifting other people up. They're not lifting themselves up and making themselves feel good about themselves by putting other people down. And that's a key distinction. And so for me, it's been very helpful to evaluate those role models that I had quickly passed off as, oh, because they're that, I can never be that. And by putting them through this new lens, I can recognize that for many of them, not all, but for many of them, there is a recognition for me that this is a healthy sense of self. This is actually where you want to end up. It's not narcissism. They haven't overshot it on the spectrum. They landed exactly where they wanted to be. Now, from where I'm sitting, it looks foreign and unfamiliar, but that's just because of where I've been sitting. There is a possibility for me to recognize parts of myself in them and take other areas where I'm not quite there and pull that up to that middle part of that spectrum where I am living with a sense of I am good, I am okay, and I'm able to lift other people up as well. I'm able to love myself. I'm able to love other people. It doesn't require me putting you down in order to lift me up or me being less than you. It doesn't require either of us to be more than or less than the other. What it requires is an equilibrium right there in the middle of that spectrum, right there in the middle of it all that allows us to experience a new reality, a new sense of self-worth, a new sense of self-love that isn't grandiose narcissism or wounded narcissism, but just a healthy sense of self-love. And that's a place where I want to be, and it's a place where I am getting more comfortable. I'm finding that healing as a wounded narcissist isn't about becoming somebody else. I have spent so much of the last several years in a career transition thinking I've got to become more like that guy. But that has been so wrong. It's not about becoming that person that you see on the internet or see on TV and becoming more like them. It's about remembering who you were before you had to protect yourself so much. Who were you before you felt the need to put that mask on in the first place? You're not broken. You've just adapted, and that adaptation is no longer necessary. So can you do the work of remembering who you were before the mask? Not to put on someone else's, not to redecorate yours, but to remember who you were before you put it on. And I'm finding an incredible amount of solace and peace and encouragement in that as I take more and more steps to stand firmly on the ground that I know that I'm meant to walk on. And I think that you can do the same. May you have joy, peace, and happiness, good health and well-being, a life of ease and prosperity, the courage to get what you want from this life, the clarity to know what that is, the imagination to not sell yourself short, and the discipline to see it through.